Hi, good morning, and welcome to the Discovery Approach Guiding Principles and Techniques call. My name is Ryan Riley. I'm the Director of Product Management and also the Community Manager for our growing team of product managers, product owners, and analysts. And over the past 10 years, I've relied on the design thinking approach and our discovery process to create new products and assess current products with the goal of always trying to define the unmet needs of our customers. And over the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about what a discovery is, how the process works, and why you should do one. But before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Sean Solomon. He's a leader within our organization and an SME on client engagement workshops. Sean, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So Sean Solomon here. Also like Ryan, I'm based in Austin, Texas, one of our product strategy leads. I'm also a certified practitioner in human-centered design from the Luma Institute. And my whole career has been really built around understanding people, whether it be for advertising or for creating digital products. So the discovery process is something that, I'm a really big fan of. And so I'm really excited to talk about this with you today.
Yeah. What's interesting is as we've grown our team over the years, there have been key individuals to help us kind of define our approach. And it's been trial and error, but we've come up with a proven structure on working with customers and working with clients to define that product. So, one of the things that we talk about is what is a discovery and what is the discovery process? So, Sean, when I think of it, there's multiple words, kind of keywords that come to mind. But when you think of a discovery and the different types of client interactions, what words come to mind to you?
Wow. Yeah, there's so many different ways to think about a discovery. And I think what we're going to realize is this conversation covers a lot and shapes a lot about it. But, I hear discovery and the first thing that I think of is really, exploration.
Yeah. Exploration and, discovery, it has to have some kind of framework around it. Our clients are money driven and trying to see those value in actually engaging with us. And it's exploration with validation. And there's a big piece I always think of as, co-creation. It's difficult to, think about anything that you're trying to solve, even if it's not even for a product, it's very difficult to do it in a silo. And I don't know, it's a journey, right? We're trying to go on a journey together. To collaborate and define and design an approach that actually solves the problem.
Yeah. And I think solving that problem, discovery, you're discovering what is that problem? What are you trying to do? What issues are we trying to solve? With a lot of our engagements, is it, does the organization know what the problem is? A lot of times, yes, not always. So sometimes, do we need to figure out, well, what is that problem? Other times it's very much, okay, well, we've got a problem, but it's maybe well, why? Why is the problem? And so it's kind of solving those before you can really, or understanding those before you really move forward into, well, how do we then solve these problems?
Yeah, the problem aspect, right? I know we're going to cover off on different types of experiences and examples of projects we've done, but it's always interesting to me when we frame these up. There's understanding of it, and you're right. Sometimes clients do come to the table with an actual challenge. But how often does that switch? You identify one problem, but really that's not the one that's the driving force behind this. And the discovery process, the what of it it's just ever evolving. There's not one.
It really
way.
Is.
Yeah.
It really is. And we were talking about this the other day and, went up on a whiteboard, which was crazy to be doing after a year and a half to actually be in the office and use a whiteboard. although I love doing everything on Miro, this it's just such a, a tactile experience actually writing on a whiteboard. But, we ask the question, what is a discovery? And it leads to so many different things, like what we're talking about right now. Like one of my favorite notes is like, well, it's a brainstorming format, but is it a format? Is that the right way to be looking at it? Is it a phase? Is it a period of time? And I think the answer is yes and no. Yeah. Or is it a one thing we talked about? It's a shift in tactics. Of how you approach, because I think that's really when we talk about the product mindset and bringing that in. And so, that being very associated with discovery and how we're always looking to ask questions and, find answers to those questions and then ask again and go back and forth. So is it a shift in tactics? Is it a certain phase of work? Is it just a framework? I think it's kind of, all of these things.
Totally. Yeah. It's like all the above. I know Chris Butler is speaking later this afternoon around the concept of the product mindset across not only the cross-functional team, but within the organization itself. And that is a big driving force behind a successful discovery, an successful journey with our clients. Yeah.
Yeah. And so kind of like to try and pull all that together, I think what's becoming obvious, and as we were talking about, what's a discovery and trying to answer that question, I think to a lot of people, it sounds like, well, this feels very ambiguous. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different pieces here. Yeah. But I think, part of that's the nature of discovery, because, discovery itself can be ambiguous. Mm-hmm. It is, we're having to ask a lot of questions and get answers. And what I think we want people to walk away with today is that it's really about that mindset and less about a very structured, specific process to follow every single time. And we'll explain why. But yeah. It's really, every discovery that I've embarked on has been different. And they've gone different ways, used different methods, but the mindset is what keeps driving it the same way. And, you can't approach each one the same, but I think that's the nature of it.
Yeah.
So I think with those questions, then, we're talking about what is a discovery, but then I think we want to know, well, why, right? Yeah. If we're talking about what's a discovery, well, why would I bother doing a discovery? Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of times you get in a situation where you say, hey, we have a problem of some kind.
Right.
And we have something that we know needs to be solved, but we don't know how to solve it, or we need to add value for customers and differentiate ourselves in the market. Like what are we supposed to do? I'm sure you're hearing, similar things.
Yeah. Or we need to come up with like big ideas. Or to your point earlier, the client comes to the table with a challenge, and we already have that big idea, but how do we go about rationalizing it? How do we determine if this is where we want to spend our time, and where's the value on that? I think another aspect too is just the landscape of the world we live in to date. I hear, across the organization that there's a move to modernize how we think and shift.
Yes, exactly. Like one key thing that I love hearing is like, we don't just want software. Like, we need users to love it.
Yes. Like, and that's a big ask, right? That's a big ask. The whole concept of matching up the features to the ever-changing client needs. It's no small task to do, especially the type of clients that we engage with at the enterprise level, the current structure that's set up there.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's definitely like we're hearing these things, and people want these things within their organizations. They're looking for new ways to approach the products that they have. Mm-hmm. And so that's, kind of why we need discovery. But Ryan, like I feel like there's something driving those questions out there. Like what do you think on
Totally.
that?
Yeah, I mean, well, so we're all consumers, right? You and me are consumers, and this COVID thing. I mean, it is really just it's changed. Well, one, you're talking about initially how we used to do these discoveries, and we still will, but they used to be in person. You were in a room, and there's nothing that takes the place of that. The connection that you can make and be able to see the level of involvement or to read, the direction that we're going. But, since the wake of COVID, the rise of digital shopping and my tenacious appetite for like entertainment needs. I mean, I've burned through Netflix. There's nothing new on there anymore. I never thought that would be the case. You know what I mean?
You've reached the end.
I've reached the end. In fact, Netflix even knows that because they have a play something now, that tries to keep me engaged. And this whole concept of instant gratification. How do you meet that? Because it's always changing. And I feel like, the digital experience is now, it literally is the primary interface for a lot of brands. And the pressure to meet customer needs will continue to mount. So why not go through this approach to really define what your users are looking for? It's constant and it's rapid change. And I don't see anything. I don't even know what the new norm is, but I knew the new norm includes rapid innovation, learn quickly, adjust. Nothing's set in stone these days, but a foundation needs to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think some of the stuff that I've been working on has been born out of that need.
Yeah.
Very much that something, and we're going to talk through a few examples today, but it's all, we need to do something different. Sometimes
we need to do something different.
Yeah, we need to do something different. And we need to make sure, back to some of the other things we heard, that like, this is going to work. This is going to resonate. Mm-hmm. Our investment's going to be worth it. We've got like a burning platform issue that we need to solve because this is just killing our business, or we need to come up with a new idea to generate more revenue. It's all pushing this, this constant and rapid change. And how do you approach that the right way?
I totally resonate with that 100%. I do. And I think, these are just a few things that I'm hearing, not only from clients, but just the current state in ideation and product definition process. And I think what the other aspect of this too is that when we embarked on this years ago, it was about a product. And for the most part, you had certain individuals that were participating, but really, I feel like you can apply this approach regardless of the area of the business. It could be, marketing challenges, or, there's sales revenue or sales aspect and retaining stickiness, or frankly, it's just revisiting the product and being able to fine tune it. I think discoveries can be applied to solve really any of those key problems, as long as the client's on board and ready to play.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's where, discovery makes a big difference. It gives us a way to create a product vision. Like it's about, creating that vision. Maybe I missed that when we were talking about, what is a discovery, but it's that vision to address the problems, because it starts there at the problems. And that's the key, because it's doing it without jumping to solutions too soon. Yeah. So it gives us a way to create that vision that brings it all together: the business problem, understanding user needs, and then how to solve it with technology.
Yeah. So the how, right? I think, and most people would probably agree with this, but when you bring in that product mindset and the collaboration through the structured workshops that we have, it really changes the narrative of the engagement right out of the gates. And because of that, there isn't just one way to do this. Where I see the best success is when we really have that co-creation, and how we do this depends on who is on this journey with us and the client's willingness to collaborate. Ideally, You bring in domain knowledge, you align the right skills from our community, and to make sure that we have the right folks involved. SMEs, domain knowledge on the specific vertical. Those all frame up a good structure to actually go out and deliver on the right outcomes. But boy, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. But in order to be truly successful, that two-way empathy needs to be established, and we don't know every detail of the organization. I think we run into this where we're coming in, where obviously we've got the chops, we've got the skill sets, but it's not our business. We know the space, but on the outside we bring a fresh perspective, but on the downside we just don't understand the nuances that impact their business on a day-to-day basis. So the willingness to co-create is where I like to start off with on how.
Yeah, definitely a two-way street. Like it's the only way you can be successful in a discovery. And I say that in the vein of, if we're looking at kind of a client and Cognizant Softvision relationship on a discovery, but if you're like looking to undertake a discovery within your own organization, that still works across departments.
Yes.
So it's something that everybody involved, it's not just a, me type thing where, hey, we need help, do this for me, help come in and solve this problem. But you got to give a lot to get a lot in this.
You got to give a lot to get a lot. Yeah, you got to have a nice mix of specialists and generalists engaged, right? The other thing too that I think about is access to those end users. And when I say end users, that we don't always create products that are consumer facing. The ones that I seem to be more focused on are those internal facing employee tools, and being able to disrupt their business process internally in the right way.
You bring up one of my favorite points right here, because I've actually gotten into deep, almost like theoretical conversation around the purpose of users on some products, because there are, and I'm totally going to plug Anjanette's talk that she's having later today, but okay. There are products that, for all practical purposes, don't actually have a user.
Right.
And so you get into, well, how do you write a user story if there's not a user? And me being kind of the purist there, I still say, like, this is affecting somebody somewhere. This product, this application, whatever, back-end service you're building is doing something for somebody somewhere that's needed in this business. You're not making something without a business need, without a user need. It's enabling something. So what's it actually enabling to happen? What's the user story that's there? So, there's always users that you need to talk to, no matter what. Because you can, especially in discovery, like, this is the time to find out. You may realize you have this hypothesis, oh, we need to totally create this totally different architecture for something because it's going to, serve the user better. We've got problems here or there. You may go talk to the user and find out, well, no, I'm being served just fine from that standpoint. What I really need is this or this. And,
right.
Maybe we need to refocus there. But the point being, like, no, if their biggest problem is something that's going to be solved by that re-architecture, awesome. Like, you're solving it for them. That's the reason you're doing it. That's why any investment's being done. It's not just for the sake of building something new. So it does have to connect back to a human, to a person somewhere.
Yeah, that reminds me of and it's not one of them from a cultural perspective that I wasn't necessarily going to touch on today, but I think that is something I initially struggled with. We recently wrapped up an architecture assessment of a current state, and initially I was tying that to some aspect of a front end experience. How is this going to impact a front end flow, the features? Well, in reality, it was headless. Being able to come in, apply this within an organization to look at the broad view of the entire infrastructure, this still works. I mean, the outcomes, it was very impressive because we ended up finding the users, and those users are the admins. There are the front-end engineers, or the back-end engineers. It is the architects. It's the DBAs. they became our primary users in defining a revised tech stack that, does support and obviously moves the needle forward from a business perspective. But yeah, it's not always the way that we, I guess, categorize what a user is.
Yeah. I think when you're looking at it from the development standpoint there, and how can we get something, built more efficiently, and we need to put that, their opinions definitely play in. I think you're right, though, that even if something was, it's still tied to the business, like you said, because ultimately you're delivering something faster. You're delivering something more efficiently, something that's going to be more stable, which it does have an end impact on that end user, because you're bringing newer features to them faster. You're providing more stability or better performance. So it is, maybe they aren't necessarily asking for that. If you talk to them and you're like, oh, I wish features came out faster. Like who says that, right? Yeah, but that's still like what ultimately is like you're trying to do, and so you're enabling that to happen. They don't even know that they want more things, but you're going to be bringing them, and you're going to be making it a better customer experience for them.
Boy, isn't that the truth? I think that's the thing that that gets me so excited about doing these discoveries, is uncovering what's not known. There's always these preconceived notions, or there's a solution that that potentially needs or wants to be put in place. But if you can get involved with the real users, being that customers or stakeholders from across different departments, it allows us to get to the heart of how the problem we're solving affects that user. Without that, it's just project as usual, right? You got a big gap there.
Yeah. So kind of speaking that, like, we've been talking about how do we approach discovery, and really, it being about the mindset. I think we still realize, though, if we're looking at incremental change or on an existing product, or if we're looking at rapid innovation, clients engage differently. All organizations have to approach discovery differently, just based on their organization. Across a number of different discoveries I've run, you've run, we've noticed a trend among some of them. No two discoveries are ever going to be the same, but they do start to fall into, kind of some big buckets, bigger, like, okay, well, this is probably how we should approach this one. We separate them out. We start to see it really depends on an organization's culture, how they operate, what they value. And those things can change. So it's not meant to say that it's like set in stone and it's static, and it can be situational. And that's where what they value really comes in, because right now they may say, oh my gosh, we need to do this as fast as possible. Other times could be, you know what, we can take our time on this and really get to some understanding. Please go ahead.
No, it's all right. I would, well, okay. You got me thinking here. So, when we talk about like the different flavors of engagements, and, the concept of no two discoveries are ever going to be the same. Which
I do want to quickly call out. That's why we changed the slide, so that it's got all the spices now, just because we're talking all the different flavors.
It's as broad as this, as the picture of the different spices. The first one I think of, where I probably run into and engage at this level, is more of the clients that are what I would consider more like process driven. And for these types of organizations, a shared understanding of the process and a detailed view of each step is a must. In fact, I don't see a lot of traction if it's more around just the process. They make decisions to move forward once each phase of the relationship is spelled out, and rightfully so. They're quantifying the value of the discovery or design thinking, and looking to qualify that the consumer needs are being met. And just recently, we completed what I consider a very successful product journey. And it started out with that client wanting to improve a specific area of their products. And they had an idea of what they were trying to accomplish. And I'm thinking you probably see this too, but man, anytime there's the opportunity for some element of that upfront knowledge transfer, it helps us build a product discovery and a team suited to their their business needs, and list out a very structured approach to the flow of the engagement. Yeah. And when I think of that too, it forces us to get our quote ducks in order, and it's something from a community perspective that when you get into product management and you know that you are the point person, you're the one leading the engagement, you're the one setting the tone. Being able to make that connection right out of the gates by laying out all the different activities, the pre-activities, of course, the timeline, the different types of workshops that will run, the format for each one of those, and where they fit in to each one of the phases. As long as that's spelled out, we see great success. But it matches up, we're talking about different client cultures or archetypes. That process driven client needs to understand the time commitment and the collaboration needed from the team. The approach for the workshops, is reviewed up front, and the outcomes of those workshops are clearly defined. And when we think about deliverables, that's the first thing, is what am I going to get out of this? And I think what's interesting about the discovery approach is that while we can define those up front, if the client understands that these may change based on the findings and we need to be agile in our thought process, then I feel like that's where the empathy starts coming in. As soon as they understand that our process is really focused on truly understanding why we're doing this, it's not just a project, like we really are invested in this, I see a big shift in that.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
And I think that, like what you're saying, they need to see the process first, and then they need to get bought into it. And so that structures, a lot of our discoveries that we do, and I'm sure other organizations undertake, where, what's my investment getting out of this? How long is it going to be? What's our commitment?
What's my investment?
They very much view it as a single project. And so they need, what is this exact thing that we're buying? And then, you can kind of paint by numbers, because we've got this framework, we come in, we apply it, say, here's exactly what we're doing. Let's go do it. And we've taken that to a number of clients I know, and we've got like 2 to 3 variations on that, but it's a very clear, this is the approach. We're going to follow it, 90, 95% to the letter, maybe change a couple things, but generally this is the thing. Yeah. And it doesn't work. And it's not that way for everybody.
It is. You're right. It's not.
And it really depends on culture.
Yeah, exactly. Depends on the culture. And, on this one that I was referring to, the one that we wrapped up, it was a 12-week discovery. And the whole concept, the whole goal was a complete digital transformation of their benefits management process. That's no small undertaking. So it requires and demands structure. And I think some of the key success factors of that was what I mentioned earlier, is expectation of roles were set prior to kickoff, alignment on the discovery approach and outcomes clearly defined. The key stakeholders during that process were deeply involved throughout it. Because when we talk about end users, it's not always that customer. Those stakeholders are users too. They can help us define this. And then, the other aspect too is not going dark. How many times do you see projects where, you give an approach and then, you have a meeting and then there's nothing for, 2 to 3 days. Being able to show those weekly outcomes, a strong cadence of either, structured meetings, or upfront figuring out breakout sessions, just to keep the visibility the visibility, transparency. Those are two key things that I think make for a successful journey with a process-driven type of organization.
I'm gonna move us to the two other archetypes that we have, just because we've got about 15 minutes and we can talk. We know we could talk all day about this.
That's very true. All right, that's fair.
So very structured, very process-oriented organizations. We need to show them what they've got, what they're getting. We've done those. Sometimes though, you just need to get moving. Your organization may not care so much for the defined process, so long as it's like, let's go.
Yeah, like this call, right? We need to keep it moving.
Exactly. Good segue to it. And in this case, I've called these organizations the Fast and the Furious, but I had to throw up, the plug for the Cognizant F1 car here, just to keep everything in the family. This is really about, we're just going to take off and get to understanding, designing, and building as quickly as we can. Speed is really the most critical factor, like a pressing need, like a burning platform you need to replace before it's deprecated, or serious performance issues that can't scale to current needs. Something has to replace it quickly. This can be the most successful if you've already got a good basis for the hypothesis of what needs to be done. I think if you don't know what needs to be done, it's going to be tough to come in and make speed your priority. But if you can, it can be really effective. I worked with a company that needed to get a new point of sale solution created as quickly as possible. The existing one was 20 years old. It was having a measurable, like a very clear measurable impact on stores when it couldn't keep up and it would go down. So, we set out to get something done very quickly and start offloading some of that pressure. At the same time, actually, we had a dual mandate to also bring more engagement in stores and looking at a mobile point of sale to get employees in front of customers more often. This was obviously before COVID. So it was, let's do that while also solving the back end critical issues with a new architecture, major initiatives that could take a lot of time on discovery, and we didn't have. So we came in and did, we did one kind of kickoff workshop, and then got into a 2-week, like we called it a sprint zero. And we aligned on goals and priorities, figured out the features needed in the MVP, and then just set to work planning them. And it was like all day workshops for 2 weeks. Yeah. But, outside of a visit to one of the stores to talk to some in-store associates, because that still has to be part of the problem or part of the process, where we're talking to the people it affects. And we did that, and we got a lot of great insight. We got a tour of the store and all the stuff that, the different associates do. But otherwise, we spent pretty much all of that 2 weeks in workshops and working sessions, hashing out requirements for the MVP, planning a new architecture, discussing the new UX for the mobile point of sale. And by the end of the 2 weeks, it wasn't all done, but we were ready to at least start some of it. We had stuff in Jira. We could, devs could start typing code immediately. And we just continued to iterate on that, really that concept of continuous discovery, which we'll plug a little bit more on at the end, but, that's what was needed. And in each subsequent sprint, we kept working towards that MVP, and we adjusted course one way or the other as we found out more if we needed to. But we kept driving towards what we'd aimed for in those 2 weeks, and we were able to hit it.
Yeah, with the Fast and Furious, I remember that engagement, Sean. I think that's the one thing I do really value with clients like this, because you get to market or you get to testing very quickly. And there's nothing better than being able to actually see what you've defined in the virtual real world, right? And being able to get that feedback right away. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, it's a really good example.
I'm going to flip it to the other end of the spectrum now, our kind of third archetype. And these are, the organizations that, we've got the order seekers, we've got the speed seekers, the thrill seekers, really. And then you've got kind of the knowledge seekers. Yeah. And this is, you got to be pretty flexible in how you come to a discovery. Some organizations are in a place where they can wait to get it right, where they value the knowledge needed to make informed decisions over speed or structure. And what this means is it can sometimes be a bit unclear on the investment ahead of time, or what process will be used. And it's definitely not meant, like, you can't do a quick discovery this way, because the focus is, much like what we're seeing in this photo here. You've got so much knowledge around you, so much you could go out and find and use. How much can you do? How much can you understand before you move forward and get that understanding to chart that path, and then testing that, and then maybe going back to change things and then test it again. And you've got to have an organization that's got tolerance for all of that, because the knowledge gain, and that really gives you that confidence in the path forward, is worth it for some organizations. And, I'm going to highlight a discovery with a client I had that looked at it this way. We set out on our discovery journey and we charted out around, 2 or 3 months to dive into things, and said, hey, let's just learn and come out with a plan on the other side. There was, there was no impending disaster that we needed to solve. There was a hypothesis, though, that a better solution was out there, which could enable a lot more revenue if we got it right. And so that's why they valued this kind of approach. So our plan was very basic. We needed to research, we needed to put ideas on paper, we needed to validate them to get the funding to move forward. We knew that last part, how much testing we were going to need to do and how long it would take. So with that, we were able to pencil in to work towards that. What else do we need to get done? How much can we do before we define that vision? And we kept it loose, knowing we need to go back and forth on many things. So we interviewed a lot of target users, understanding their jobs, daily routines, how they use their current tools, what works, what didn't, what they wish they could do. The more we uncovered, more it led to more paths to research. And so we'd go off and say, okay, well, why don't you give us a demo of that tool you use so we can better understand it? So it was a very meandering thing, but along the way, we started to get a rough solution of the ideas. It was starting to come together as we learned. And we would follow up with our interviewees, to vet these ideas, see what resonated, make sure we were thinking about it the right way. So there was a lot of back and forth. And we were able to get where we wanted and test the concepts with a wide audience. And, they scored very well. But that's a process that it can't work for every organization. This one, it had its priorities and a level of tolerance that suited the approach well. But, I think those 3 buckets, no matter which way we need to approach the discovery, the key there is that the focus was on solving for people.
Exactly.
It needs to be that design-led process, really utilizing, what everybody's talking about, design thinking, right?
Yeah, and being able to understand where the client's at, which is the 3 kind of areas we just touched on, is what is their level of tolerance through the ideation process. And I think when you talk about this last one, that research aspect, I touched on it earlier, but the ability to understand the space to the best of our abilities is where we always strive to be. But to fill in those last puzzle pieces to really get the holistic view of the impact, that's where those key stakeholders come into play, and access to those end users to validate that. Because I would imagine on this one, you talk about all the research and that there was potentially a challenge right out front to solve, but as you dove deeper, well, in reality, it just creates a very, very healthy backlog, right?
Yeah, it does. There was so much on that one that, we had an alpha, an MVP, a whole new product coming in, part of it as a 3rd release. And then, further backlog beyond that. There was a ton. We learned so much.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about these, let's talk about design thinking and our toolbox of what we.
Yes, we did promise methods. And so I think that's the key there, is that the methods employed are really based on a broad framework. People talk about design thinking, and there's no single definition to it. It's an idea, a strategy, a method, kind of like what we're saying about discovery, right? But it's a way of seeing the world. And it's, for the purposes of our conversation and kind of what we want to cover in the next very few minutes, let me just use these broad strokes. It's a problem-solving framework. It's based in empathy. We've talked about that a lot, but really, understanding people, and it's a repeatable process. There's a lot of different ways to think about different methods, different ways of putting design thinking on paper and what it is. Like Google's got their own thing, Luma, there's the Stanford D School, IDEO. Design Council, I think, is a really good way of framing it, because they have the double diamond. And I think that is a thing that a lot of other design thinking frameworks still fit into, because the double diamond, I'm going to pull it up here, is really it helps visualize two distinct, it's simple. Like, this is totally as base down as it can be, but it's just how we think, divergent and convergent thinking. You start out at the beginning, where you're discovering insight to the problem, your thinking is diverging. You're open, you're expanding, you're looking at everything. And then you converge on a problem. So your thinking starts closing in on something. And then, oh, well, we need to start coming up with solutions. You start exploring solutions again, opening up. And then, all right, well, we've explored, we've got a bunch of ideas. Let's start refining and getting down to what we're actually going to do. Yeah. That is like the 30-second version of so much that we could talk about on this. I've actually given a whole presentation just on design thinking before, but I know we want to talk about discovery methods here.
Yeah.
And so, Ryan, I don't know if you want to kick it off with discover, kind of that empathize phase and what we want to talk about there.
Yeah, just to touch briefly, like for the concept of like the divergent thinking and being able to come down and be able to solve a problem, it comes in multiple flavors. But to your point, that the first level is empathy. So we all understand what empathy is, but the concept of really trying to truly understand what is driving that user, what the impact is a key factor in that divergent thinking. I think about some of the engagements where, one of the large coffee shops we were working with, they were working on their inventory management. And while they thought there was a specific challenge with it, in reality, once we spent the time watching the baristas, basically the day in the life of that barista, to understand the level of complexity using a mobile device to track inventory, it became very clear that there was more problems than just that. But it started with the empathy. It started and it like you said earlier. I mean, it's a fun way to understand what are the challenges and how we go about attacking a problem. And it's learning. We've got to learn about what we are trying to accomplish. And there are different parts of it, right? But and as you mentioned, there's the Luma methods, and I got to take a step back here because not everyone's familiar. When we're talking about methods, we're talking about structured frameworks to engage with clients, a clear outline of what we're trying to accomplish through these workshops, right? And to give them that level of comfort that time is well spent in empathizing and in determining where we need to put our focus.
Yeah, there's great ways to workshop this. I think what you just talked about, though, like ride-alongs, contextual inquiry, that has to be part of the process. You're not going to get that in a workshop. You can have somebody there as a proxy. Sometimes we do that a lot, where they represent the client. We do, kind of like empathy mapping, and we do a journey map based on that. But I think the most critical part, if you can, is going to be talking to those actual users, those actual customers, understanding their journey, getting their input on everything, just observing even.
The concept of proxy, you're right. I mean, that's something we constantly are working with their clients. And I think it's a great place to start. I really do, because they know their business, but let's validate that. Let's be able to really do that day in the life, do those ride-alongs, be able to do surveys, focus groups, aspects that help us frame up and dive deeper into the problem.
Mm-hmm. And then I think as we've done that, then we need to start defining.
Yes, eventually, right?
Yeah, it depends on the organizational culture, though. Like sometimes we're like, oh, we've reached this point, we have to go. Others are, well, we're well beyond that because we're going for speed. And some are like, no, let's keep learning.
Or it's time boxed, right? I mean, there are clear deadlines. There are clear deadlines.
So you've got to then take that and explore, like, what do we need to plan for? At this stage, we're really talking about we've learned all this stuff. Let's create real artifacts. Let's create those user journeys. Let's document them. Let's see where all the problems are. Let's get all those persona documentation put together. Problem tree analysis, which helps us shift our focus, ensure we're looking to solve the right problem based on what we've learned. I was working with an education company, and we were trying to find ways to increase the productivity of content creators. And we've been through many, many rounds of interviews and observation where they had them walk us through their days and, watch them use these different tools to get their jobs done. And a picture started to emerge of what we were defining. And we had like a digital, like a wall of sticky notes in Miro.
I love that.
Yeah. And, personas based on the different people where we interviewed all kind of put up around it and their specialties and ultimately their different needs. And it helped start to clarify all these gaps and identify focus areas using their motivations as a guide. A clear picture began to emerge, and, something we could put down for a real challenge statement, that design brief right in the middle of that screen there where, we do a how might we, and for us it was, how might we create a unified experience that brings in each of their tools as they need them, yada yada, a lot in there, and it sounds like a mouthful, but it paints a very clear picture. And so we had a very clear problem definition, what we're going to be trying to solve for, and then that's what gets us into diverging again. The second diamond, I think this is the part that everybody wants to get to, because it's like, all right, now we're coming up with ideas.
Yeah, I'm with you. When you talk about defining those personas or like our prototype personas, that's an aspect. It's another word that's been thrown around so much, that your persona does not have to be this, extremely detailed view of your different types of customers. It's a driving force. It's something for us to make sure that we still have our eye on the ball, especially when it comes down to the ideation process. And, as we're talking about this, I think, it's key for anyone to know that this is not just product. I mean, we are tied to the hip to our UX and UI design leads. We've got an architect, or a tech lead that's part of this. We've got business analysts. We've got a nice structured team to help fill on these gaps. And that persona, when we talk about cross-functional, that product mindset all the way through the organization, setting the stage for understanding who we are trying to develop something for, brings back that empathy, right? It gives that connection there. So you're not just doing something very task-orientated.
So speaking of being task-orientated,
yes,
given we've got about 3 minutes, I'm going to switch archetypes here from being all about the knowledge to all about the speed.
Okay.
So let me switch this up. What's your favorite method to use in ideation?
My favorite method, I like right out of the gates, the key stakeholder, like a rotoscope and key stakeholder mapping. Again, it goes back to setting that stage. I like to know who's going to be involved. And sometimes when you think you can create people, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, what about, let's skip to actually coming up with ideas now. Let's say we've defined the problem.
So we define the problem. I like lightning talks. I think those are always fun. That's where we bring in, potential examples in the market. It can be, maybe it's not even in that space, but to spark that innovation and thought process. That's one of my favorite ones to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lightning talks, the demos, then we get into solution sketching. Those are great methods. Things like a creative matrix, if we want to get just a ton of ideas on
crazy
very quickly. Crazy eights, very quick. Yeah, so many different things around ideation that we can do, but eventually then we have to, we've got to deliver. We've got to get those solutions that work, right? So I think this becomes like the clearest, like everybody's used, like it's very important and you got to do it, but there's not as much variation when we get to that last stage in terms of what's done. We're going to build prototypes. We're going to test them.
Yeah.
You've got different ways of testing, whether you're sticking stuff online through like Maze or user testing or something, and have users give feedback. You can do live sessions with them to validate concepts. There's actually good methods for testing and workshops as well, which I think are really cool, with a lot of like think aloud testing.
Yeah, Sean, this is where I feel like this is the crux of the engagement. This is where the proof is in the pudding. This is where it starts to becoming to a life. And we are taking all that information that we gathered up front, and it's becoming something that you can experience. And you can tell if you're hitting the mark. And here's the thing, sometimes we don't hit the mark. Sometimes we need to go back and we need to validate with those end users. So when we talk about testing, you're right. I mean, from a user testing methodology, we will try multiple different avenues and channels to get the information we need to give the confidence to the client that we're building the right products. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're basically at time. Shelby, I think there's a couple questions.
Yes, thank you, Ryan and Sean. The first question here, how do you handle POs from the client side that are reticent to share the OKRs and metrics that the team needs as North Stars for their proposals for discoveries?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. I think it goes back to that two-way street that, you need that empathy both ways. And if that's not being shared, you're not really, I don't know, you're not going to be well set up for success, because you're at that point not driving towards something that's solving problems if you don't know what you're trying to have the solution be. Those OKRs are critical for understanding what you're aiming towards.
Yeah, with the OKRs and so knowledge transfer, I think that's always interesting. I mean, I think about some of the other engagements where we have an exercise specifically focused around this, like learnings from the past. Have you tried this before? What went well? What didn't go well? The whole goal is to create a relationship with that customer, with that client, where trust becomes the driving force around the engagement. And that's hard to do, specifically when it is a new engagement. But I will tell you that, where there's not that visibility, it's deeper than that. Why are they not sharing it with us? What is the challenge with that? And the majority of the time, what I see is that there's not complete buy-in on the approach. We haven't provided enough understanding of why we need that information. And then the other aspect too, right, is that, well, that's something that you're supposed to come up with. That's something that we're paying you to do. Well, that's where that co-creation comes into play. And there's multiple ways to go about it, but then other times we're just not going to get it. So we just have to buckle down, do our best of our abilities to define those. Ways that we've done that is by listing them out and providing a recommendation, and then bouncing that off of what they won't share with us, seeing how close we are to the mark. But again, I think it goes back to that trust factor. And once that trust is gained, they'll let us do our ideation and our product approach the way we do it, because they can see the outcomes of those. But that's a common occurrence, especially with organizations that have worked with agencies, like some of our competitors. Their willingness to share that information is somewhat limited.
Thanks, Ryan. And we have just a few minutes for this final question. How do you feel the discovery process blends with Scrum development?
Lovely. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think it's a match made in heaven.
Ryan, I think that's the perfect question to segue to continuous discovery, right?
I was getting ready to say, yeah. Let me just say this, Sean, you can add to it. But when we talk to clients and we're in that proposal phase, I get really excited when they understand this mindset of like a dual agile track. And the reason I think it's such a good match, because if we look at those kind of three archetypes of clients, that fast and furious, or even the process driven, that Scrum process allows us to be as transparent as we feel comfortable on the direction we're going. It allows us to provide, I wouldn't even call them escalations, but just variations in the path to make it not an escalation. We've thrown around this journey concepts on this call, but it really is a journey, man. I mean, it's like our clients are no different than you and I. We're wanting to do the same thing. There's fear right out of the gates. So having that connection there, specifically once we provide a delivery plan, it's just a natural progression. We've already set the stage on our governance model, right, and our framework, Sean. So I don't see these being a success without it.
I think that how that works. And actually, if you can, to everybody listening, make Teresa Torres's call later today.
Yeah.
She talks about continuous discovery, because it's the perfect answer to this. And we do this because we, like I said, discovery isn't just a phase, because it has to always be ongoing. And the way it works with Scrum is you're continually getting stuff into the backlog for the development team to execute on. And you keep doing that. You never stop. You know, multiple engagements I've been on, we've had a process that worked really well, because everything is focused on being at least a sprint. Sometimes, if we're lucky, 2 sprints out that we're working on, that we get it into grooming with the development team to get it into the backlog, and can keep doing that. You keep researching. It's kind of, you know, we showed that double diamond. You're constantly going through that. And the thing is, you can have multiple double diamonds kind of stacked next to each other, being at different phases on different things. We're exploring this one problem and trying to understand, while on another, we're already designing the solution to that problem. So that they're kind of happening at the same time. And as we're doing that, we're getting pieces into the backlog, the dev team's picking it up, and we go from there, and reviewing every 2 weeks.
Yeah, you know, the question Scrum, I think we get it, we practice it. But I've never been on a client engagement where it's been followed to the T. I think another big deciding factor here is, while we're doing it, how much is the client on board with that process? Because, I mean, they're part of this. So the dependencies, some of that's on their level of involvement with us. But the goal is, right, to make it easier on the program managers, allow the Scrum Master to fully understand, you know, the velocity and the story points, and how much we can actually develop in a certain amount of time.
Awesome. Well, I think that is time, if we're still on and haven't been cut off.
Yeah, I think we're still going. So let me just say this. Sean had mentioned there's a couple other calls today for Product Day, but let me leave you with this. None of this is possible without a strong collaboration. It's one thing to know the process, but, you know, a good facilitator who can lead these discussions with a team that has the domain knowledge and the concept of cross-functionality product mindset, it sets us up for success right out of the gates. You know, a buy-in approach is great, but faith in our approach takes a sense of trust right out of the engagement at the front. And spending that time going through the process to understand what truly the problem is where we see the benefits, not only to us, you know, from an enjoyment level and a connection with the clients and those end users. So as it is Product Day, Sean mentioned, you know, we've got multiple speakers talking about their own experience working in the product world. We've got Teresa Torres later this afternoon talking about continuous discovery, and Sean mentioned EdgeNet. She's talking about a specific discovery with one of our clients. And, you know, we've got Chris Butler and Jeremy Horn talking about the product mindset and what it's like to be a product manager. So I hope you all found this informative. If y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But Sean, thanks for joining me, man. I had a great time.
Yeah. Pleasure as always.